Well, you probably had to figure that I was going to talk about this at some point. I have a nose for nonsense around Barcelona in particular, but I'm not necessarily going to turn this into like a bashing Barcelona situation. It's just a really interesting transfer that made me think of. Do you remember that meme from Breaking Bad where you can't keep getting away with this? Manchester City's ability to bring in incredibly valuable, experienced, talented players for way under market value or what you would expect to have to pay in order to get them is just absolutely amazing. It is really, really impressive. Like Real Madrid and Manchester City, those two teams and their transfer policies overall, their ability to just acquire and stockpile players that they actually want to have is crazy. Needs to be studied in a factory by scientists at a laboratory, not a factory. I didn't do well in math or science in school. I suppose that's how I end up here. But anyways, I'm talking about I'm talking about the Ilkay Gundogan transfer, right? And we'll start with his statement, right? He played at Barcelona for 1 year and he's already headed back to Manchester City for no money down, like any used car lot would say. He said, after just 1 year, it's already time to say goodbye. I came here to face a new exciting challenge, and I was ready for it. I've given everything to fight for the team and the club the best possible way in a difficult season, and I was looking forward to helping my teammates in the new campaign. Now I'm leaving in a difficult situation, but if my departure can help the club financially, it makes me a bit less sad. I mean, how many times have we heard that around Barcelona? I mean, for years we've been talking about players at Barcelona being asked to take pay cuts. We've been talking about players at Barcelona that are in danger of not being registered for the league, and then Barcelona finds a way in the 11th hour to sell one guy, force another guy out, and resell the same media rights for the second year in a row, and then they're able to barely squeak all of the people that they've added to their team under the bar and register them all for the league in time. This sale, in part, probably has to do with the Dani Olmo sale, because as of the time of me making this video, Dani Olmo is still not registered for the league with Barcelona, at least according to The Athletic. So obviously Dani Olmo was the big pickup for Barcelona in this transfer window. And The Athletic did some excellent reporting on this. Again, they are the ones that kind of knock it out of the park the best when it comes to this type of coverage. But they talk about the fact that there was a conversation, like obviously it's referenced by Ilkay Gundogan here, between Gundogan and Hansi Flick behind the scenes, where they talked about the fact that, you know, maybe he wasn't in their plans. Specifically, his salary was standing in the way of the club's plans for 2024-2025. Now, this is complicated by the fact that Ilkay Gundogan was actually the most used player on the team last year. He played more than anybody else at Barcelona. And as The Athletic points out, that could have been a problem. The 2-year deal he signed was automatically extended by a further season. So he's under contract for this year and next year at Barcelona, but they'd already decided that his wage was going to be a problem. Now, Barcelona is not the only team. I can't dump on them too much for making this decision, because Barcelona is not the only team that is offloading a player because they want to get rid of their wage. But that player is usually not a player of Ilkay Gundogan's quality. It's usually the types of players that, you know, outside of N'Golo Kante, the types of players that Chelsea would be selling to the Saudi League in order to accomplish the same thing and kind of unload some of the salaries that they'd been paying out to previous deals so they could turn around and spend $5 billion. And, you know, I'm assuming some of the things that they stole from like the Natural Museum of History in London or something in order to afford all of the transfers that they've managed to pull off. No, the free transfer of somebody like Ilkay Gundogan is unusual. I mean, I realize that in 2 or 3 years, Ilkay Gundogan is going to be a prime candidate for MLS or Saudi Arabia. But we're talking about somebody that 2 years ago captained a team to a treble. The second ever major trophy treble coming out of England ever. Right? I don't need to elaborate about how important Ilkay Gundogan was to that treble, because we're talking about a guy that literally captained the entire team to that treble. He then spends 1 year in Barcelona and then bounces back to Manchester City for free. Now, Manchester City's part of this transfer was offensively easy. Apparently, after the first conversation that Gundogan had with Hansi Flick, he could kind of see the writing on the wall. He literally just went home and called Pep Guardiola, at which point Pep Guardiola goes, obviously. Like, they moved Ilkay Gundogan on because they just felt like signing a new significant deal was probably going to be a problem. But considering that Barcelona owes Ilkay Gundogan a ton of money, like I don't know the exact deals of this transfer, but it definitely is going to mean that Manchester City is not going to have to fork over as many years or as many dollars as they probably would have otherwise if they were going to try and keep Gundogan in the first place. I also don't blame Ilkay Gundogan for wanting to move to Barcelona. He mentions that in his statement that he just won the treble. He's been at Manchester City for 7 years. He wants to move on. Those are all of the different angles going on in this transfer. But what I really didn't want to happen is this transfer to go completely under the radar here, because we now have the player that played more than anybody else on Barcelona last season moving for a completely free transfer to one of Barcelona's main major European competitors in one of the best teams in the world in Manchester City, who's going to slot back in there. And he's not going to miss a beat. I mean, it's like literally the easiest transfer of all time. As Pep Guardiola told Sky Sports, he knows what we want to do. He doesn't need to adapt. He knows the city, the club, the way we want to play. He'll immediately settle good. And while I said I don't blame Barcelona for doing this, a lot of different clubs in recent years have done these types of salary dumps. There is proof in this transfer of the two tiers of big clubs that seem to exist in the world, right? And Manchester City is in one of those tiers, and Barcelona is in the other, right? And in that Manchester City tier, I would put just a few teams: Bayern, Real Madrid, Manchester City. I'm sure there's a few more, but it's 3 a.m, and I don't feel like, drinking the A3 omega juiced acid, whatever the shit's going to get my brain working in this hour. But those are the clubs that know when to let players go and know how to bring in players. I mean, we're looking at a club in Manchester City. They got Erling Haaland for way below market value. They got like Mateo Kovacic for peanuts, right? They managed to get these guys that have tons of experience, tons of pedigree, tons of quality. In Ilkay Gundogan's case, an unbelievably intimate understanding of how things already work at Manchester City. I mean, it's like finding the last piece of the puzzle just sitting underneath the table. And you go, I didn't know that was going to be there, but perfect. It fits right here, right? You just slot it right back in. It is amazing how different those two things are. And then you've got Barcelona, where it seems very reactionary, right? Where Manchester City and Real Madrid and Bayern, these clubs feel like they are 5, 10, 15 moves ahead when they're working with these types of transfers. Like almost like, okay, Gundogan was on a yo-yo. Like, we're going to go build it without you for a year, but then zing, we'll take you back. That's perfectly fine. And then Barcelona, where they gave him a 2-year contract last year, right? And then he plays, I believe the Athletics had 60% of the matches to trigger a further contract extension for a year. And yet after 1 year of what would end up being 3 years in his contract, all of a sudden he's not a part of the plan anymore and he's got to move on. A big part of this is you got a new manager in town. They're gonna have their different favorites. Obviously, Flick doesn't like having Ilkay Gundogan around the team with Dani Olmo coming in and Pedri ideally not being hurt until the end of time and those sorts of players that would be able to fill that role. But it just feels like an L. I don't think it's as big of an L as it looks like from the outside for Barcelona, right? Because it does make sense, and I think picking up Dani Olmo makes more sense long term than having Ilkay Gundogan there. But you were letting go of the player that played the most minutes on your team last season for free. He had multiple years left on his contract. I would assume they're going to have to pay out something left on that. I can't find, at least for the moment, what the exact finances of the deal are in terms of letting him go back to Manchester City. And in the meantime, Manchester City is picking up a talisman who's still got it left in his legs. He just retired from the international team, so he's going to be all yours, and he's going to get a nice big rest during each international break, particularly in the first half of the season. You typically see people when they retire from international teams, you get like a boost for a season or two. That or you just retire instantly. Those are your two options. But Ilkay Gundogan is now like, he's seen the other side and he's just decided that he's going to go back. It's not a terrible move for Barcelona, but it's a coup for Manchester City. Like, he's 33 right now. Cool. 2 seasons, and then he'll ride off into the sunset to MLS or Saudi Arabia and take a nice big paycheck eventually, and I'm sure have an absolutely fantastic time. Find new experiences, as the players would like to say. But if you didn't see this transfer and you were wondering why Ilkay Gundogan is just going to pop back up in a Manchester City jersey, it was as weird as you thought. It was exactly as weird as you thought, and I mean, when you dig into the weeds, it does make sense for everybody involved, but they can't keep getting away with it. How do they keep getting away with it?